The odds on the chalkboard said it plainly. Chuck Norris to win, 1 to 12. The thin Chinese man to win, 40 to 1, 40 to 1. That is what the room thought of Bruce Lee that night. Every man in that warehouse had money down, and almost every dollar of it was against him. I know, because I was the one holding the cash box. My name is Sal Moretti. I ran the book on private fights in that part of the city for 19 years. I have seen men win fortunes and lose homes in the same evening, and I have only ever told this story to my own son, once before he passed. Tonight I will tell it to you, because what happened in those 7 seconds I have never been able to explain, and I have stopped trying. I can only tell you what I saw. It was 1968, not the tournament, not the dojo, a private fight in a converted warehouse south of the city, the kind of place that does not exist on any map and never advertised. Rich men came to these, businessmen, a few names you would know. They came for the one thing money cannot usually buy. The feeling of watching two men risk everything while you risk only your wallet. And that year, the man they all came to watch was Chuck Norris. I have to be honest with you about Chuck, because it would be easy to paint him as the villain. He was not, exactly. He was the most decorated karate champion in the country, and he had earned every inch of it. Nobody fought their way up like Chuck did. Discipline, power, speed that did not belong in a man that size. These private fights were not really his world. He had been pulled into this one by a promoter who waved enough money to make a champion forget his better judgment. But here is the thing about a man who has never lost. He starts to believe the winning is who he is, not something he does, something he is. And a man like that does not just want to beat you. He needs you to know, beyond any doubt, that he was always going to. That need was the only weak spot Chuck Norris had. That night, it was the only one that mattered. I had seen Chuck fight in that warehouse twice before. Both times, other man was good. Real fighters, handpicked, paid well to make it look like a contest. Both times, it was over inside 2 minutes, and not because Chuck rushed. He took his time. He let the other man believe, for a little while, that he had a chance, and then he closed the door, slowly, like a man who enjoyed the sound of it shutting. That was the Chuck Norris the crowd paid to see. Not just a winner, a man who made the winning look like a foregone conclusion every time, on purpose. The promoters loved him for it. The crowd loved him for it. The men betting loved him most of all, because a sure thing is the easiest money there is. And that, I think, is why what happened next hit that room so hard. They had not come to watch a fight. They had come to watch a certainty. The man who arrived to fight him could not have looked more wrong for the part. Thin, quiet, a dark jacket and soft shoes. He carried no bag, no entourage, no trainer barking in his ear. He walked into that warehouse like a man arriving at a library, not a fight. The crowd took one look at him and started laughing. And then they started betting. I watched the money pour in against him, bigger and bigger. Men shoving bills at me, grinning, certain. 40 to 1 and you're still not taking the little guy? One of them shouted, and the whole room laughed. Nobody took the little guy. By the time the betting closed, I was holding more money against that thin stranger than I had held against any fighter in my life. I remember thinking I was about to have the easiest payout of my career. Let me tell you about the room, so you understand. There were maybe 200 men in that warehouse, cigar smoke hanging in the lights, whiskey in paper cups, a roped-off square in the middle of a concrete floor, stained from years of nights like this one. These were not nice men. Most of them had paid to watch someone get hurt, and they were not shy about it. When the thin man stepped into the square, the jeering started. Go home, Grandpa's gonna miss you. Somebody check if he's lost. He did not react, not a flicker. He just stood in his corner, rolling his shoulders once, looking at the floor like he was reading something written on it. Across from him, Chuck Norris cracked his neck and grinned at the crowd, and the crowd roared back, because they loved him and because they had all just bet on him. There was one man who did not laugh. He stood near the back, older, a scar across one eyebrow. The others gave him room without seeming to notice they were doing it. I knew him a little. They called him the Greek. He had fought, long ago, in places worse than this one. He did not bet on fights anymore. He just came to watch. I saw him looking at the thin stranger with a strange stillness on his face. He caught me watching him, and he leaned over, and he said something I did not understand at the time. Sal, he said quietly, whatever you're holding against that one, give it back to the men now, while you still can. I laughed.
40 to 1 Greek.
You serious? He did not laugh. "I've only seen a man stand like that twice in my life," he said. "Both times, the fight was already over. The other fella just didn't know it yet. I want to stop here because I need you to understand what I believed in that moment. I had run 1,000 fights. I knew what a winner looked like. Big shoulders, mean eyes, a body built to hurt people. That was Chuck Norris. The thin man looked like a strong breeze would carry him off. So when the Greek told me to give the money back, I thought he had finally gotten old and soft. I kept the money. It is the single biggest mistake I made in 19 years of running that book." But the Greek did not get up. He did not warn the room. He did not place a bet of his own. He just settled back against the wall, folded his arms, and watched the thin man with the patience of someone who already knew the ending and had made his peace with not being believed. I should have watched his face instead of the chalkboard, because everything I needed to know about the next 7 seconds was written on it, and I missed it because I was counting money. The promoter stepped into the square and held up his hands. No gloves, no rounds, no rules anyone bothered to say out loud. First man who could not continue, lost. That was the whole arrangement. He looked at Chuck. Chuck nodded, loose and easy. He looked at the thin man. The thin man nodded once, the way you nod a question you find slightly boring. The promoter stepped out of the square, and the room leaned in. I had my hand on the cash box and my eyes on the thin man, and I remember a strange detail. He was not breathing hard. He was not braced. He was not even fully facing Chuck. He stood almost sideways, weight easy, hands low, like a man waiting for a bus. Chuck came out fast, and what happened next, I have spent 50 years dividing into seconds, because it is the only way my mind can hold it. 1. Chuck closed the distance and threw the right hand that had ended more fights than I could count. A perfect punch. I had seen it knock a heavyweight off his feet. It hit nothing. The thin man was not where the punch went. He had not jumped. He had not even seemed to hurry. The punch simply arrived at an empty space, and he was a half step to the side of it, already looking past Chuck's shoulder. The crowd made a small, confused sound. 2. Chuck recovered fast. He was a champion. He covered the miss in an instant and threw a hook off the other hand. The thin man dipped under it, smooth, unhurried. The hook combed through the air above his hair. Now the crowd was silent. 3. Chuck threw a kick, high, fast, brutal, the kind that breaks ribs. The thin man turned his body a few inches, and the kick passed across his chest like a door swinging shut in front of him, close enough to feel the wind of it, not close enough to touch. I looked down at my cash box. I looked back up. I did not understand what I was watching. 4. Now Chuck knew. I saw it cross his face, the first real flicker of doubt I had ever seen on that man. He stopped throwing single shots and came in with everything. A flurry, the assault that had buried every fighter who ever stood across from him. The thin man moved backward through it like water sliding downhill. Slip, lean, turn, step, not one punch landed. He still had not thrown a single strike of his own. 5. And then, and the Greek was right, the fight was already over, and Chuck just hadn't been told. The thin man stopped going backward. He went forward, into the middle of the flurry, toward the bigger man, the one place no sane fighter goes. He stepped inside Chuck's arms, so close that all that size and power suddenly had nowhere to land, chest to chest. And for the first time all night, the thin man's hands came up. 6. I did not see the strike. I want to be honest with you about that. 200 men were in that room, and I have never met one who could tell you exactly what they saw. There was a movement, quick and small and final. The thin man's hand touched Chuck's body once, somewhere along the center line, the way you might press a single key on a piano, and Chuck Norris's legs stopped being his. 7. The most decorated karate champion in the country sat down on that stained concrete floor. Not knocked out, not bleeding, just down, sitting, blinking up at the lights like a man who had stepped off a curb that was not there. And the room, 200 loud, drunk, certain men, went completely silent. I have been in that warehouse for fights that ended in screaming, in blood, in men carried out. I had never once heard it go silent. You could hear the cigars burning. I have tried many times to describe that silence to people. It was not the silence of a crowd that was bored, or a crowd that was waiting. It was the silence of 200 men, all discovering at the exact same instant that they had been wrong about something they had been completely sure of. There is no sound a crowd makes for that. There is only the sudden absence of every sound they had been making a moment before. I have heard that silence one time in my life. I never want to hear it again, and I would give a great deal to hear it just once more. The thin man stepped back, He did not celebrate. He did not look at the crowd. He did not even look pleased. He looked, if anything, a little sorry. He reached down and offered Chuck his hand. And here's the part that I think about more than the 7 seconds. Chuck Norris took it. This proud, undefeated man, who had just been sat on the floor in front of 200 witnesses. He looked up at the hand for a long moment, and then he took it and let the smaller man help him to his feet. In that world, in that room, that took more courage than the fight ever could have. Chuck stood. He looked at the thin man. He was breathing hard. The thin man was not breathing hard at all. How? Chuck said. Not even a full question, just a word. The thin man answered quietly. The room was so silent that, like even at the cash box, I heard every word. You came here to win, he said. I came here to be correct. Those are different things, and they move at different speeds. Chuck just looked at him. You spent 7 seconds trying to beat me, the thin man said. I spent them reading you. By the second punch, I knew everything you were going to do. You have only one plan. It is a very good plan, but it is one. He let that sit. A man with one plan is not unbeatable, he said. He is just undefeated. Until tonight, no one had shown you the difference. Then Chuck Norris asked the question the whole silent room was holding. Who are you? The thin man bent down, picked up the dark jacket he had folded in the corner, and put it back on. My name is Bruce Lee, he said, and the name went through that warehouse like a cold draft. A few of them had heard it, whispered in gyms, attached to stories nobody quite believed. A man too fast to film properly. A man who turned down every tournament because he had nothing to prove in them. They had bet 40-1 against Bruce Lee. And now they understood. They had been betting against a man most of them would never have been allowed to share a ring with. I want to tell you what happened at the cash box, because it is the part of the story I am least proud of, and the part that matters most. When the fight ended, I owed money, a lot of it. A handful of men had taken the 40-1, almost as a joke, and now those jokes were worth a fortune. But most of the room had bet against Bruce Lee. Most of the room had lost everything they put down, and these were not men who lost money gracefully. The mood in that warehouse started to turn. I felt it. 19 years of running that book, you learn to feel a room going from stunned to angry. Somebody shouted that it was fixed, that no man moves like that the little guy was a trick. And the crowd, humiliated, looking for somewhere to put the shame of being so certain and so wrong. The crowd started to agree. It was Bruce Lee who stopped it. He had been about to leave. He was at the edge of the square, jacket on. He turned around and walked back to the center, and he raised one hand, and somehow that small gesture quieted 200 angry men. It was not fixed, he said, and he is not a trick. He nodded toward Chuck. This is one of the best fighters alive. You did not bet against a weak man tonight. You bet against the wrong thing. He looked around the room slowly. You all bet on size, on record, on the man who had never lost. He paused. You bet on certainty. And certainty is the easiest thing in the world to sell to a crowd, and the most expensive thing in the world to actually own. Nobody moved. Pay your debts, Bruce said to them quietly. You did not lose to a trick. You lost to your own assumptions. That is a cheaper lesson than it feels like right now. Take it home. And then he walked out. The strange thing is, the room did pay. I do not fully understand it even now. 200 angry men, who a minute earlier were ready to burn the place down. And after that thin stranger spoke, they lined up at my box and paid what they owed. Some of them were almost calm about it. Like losing the money hurt less than the thing he had said about why they lost it. I remember one man in particular. He had bet big against Bruce Lee. More than he could afford, I think. The kind of bet a man makes when he is so certain he forgets it is a bet at all. When he came to my box, his hands were shaking, not with anger, with something closer to embarrassment. I've been coming here 11 years, he said, mostly to himself. 11 years, betting on the big man, winning, mostly. He counted out the money he owed. Never once asked myself why I was so sure. He pushed the bills across. Cheapest education I ever got, he said, and it cost me everything in my pockets. Then he laughed, a strange, surprised little laugh, and walked out into the night a poorer and, I suspect, a wiser man. The Greek came by the box last. He had not bet, of course. He never did. He just looked at me and at the money, and he said, I told you to give it back. You did, I said. He almost smiled. He didn't beat Chuck Norris tonight, you know. I asked him what he meant. Chuck Norris was always going to lose that fight, the Greek said. He lost it the day he decided he couldn't. The little fella just showed up to collect. Then he put on his coat and left. I closed the book on private fights not long after that night. I would love to tell you it was because of some great moral awakening. It was not entirely. The truth is simpler. After you watch something like that, the fights stop being interesting. You spend years selling people the idea that the big man wins, the strong man wins, the certain man wins, that the odds tell the truth. And then a thin man in a dark jacket walks in off the street and sits your champion on the floor in 7 seconds and refuses to gloat and tells 200 furious men to pay their debts and go home wiser. And you realize you have spent 19 years taking money from people for believing a thing that was never true. I saw Chuck Norris one more time, years later. He had become something different by then. A teacher, a better man, by every account, than the champion he had been. I asked him if he was ashamed of that night, of being sat down in front of 200 men who had all bet he couldn't be. He thought about it a long time. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, he said. Everyone in that room bet I was unbeatable, including me. He shook his head. He didn't take my title. He took the lie. And a man cannot grow while he's still holding the lie. He looked at me. You held the money that night, Sal. So let me ask, of everyone in that warehouse, every man who bet against the little fella, who do you think actually won? I did not have an answer. I still don't. But I know what I saw. 200 men bet against a thin stranger because he was small and quiet and did not look like much. 7 seconds later, the room went silent. And the only 2 men in that warehouse who walked out richer than they came were the champion who lost and the stranger who never once bragged about winning.